Okay, so I chose to do the alternative assignment for the RTTP papers, and so my speech will be in conjunction with my um, one essay on a proposed amendment that was never ratified. So the amendment that I chose to write my paper on was one proposed by Victor Berger, and the amendment was to abolish the Senate because he thought that it was useless and even in the way of the progression and the success of the country. And so I have my paper pulled up here, but I'm just going to use it to refer to. So the first reason that I would agree with his proposed amendment to abolish the Senate would be that there is very disproportionate representation, meaning that there are two senators assigned to every state. I mean, they get voted in, but there's two senators per state. However, that's very unfair because populations vary drastically from state to state. So in a state like Wyoming, who has a population of about 579-ish thousand people, and a state like California, who has like 39.5 million people, the ratio of individual to senator is not even close. And so while it seems like two individuals or two representatives covering 579,000 people at first seemed crazy to me, but then when I thought about two people representing 39.5 million people, it then makes Wyoming seem like they're getting individual attention, which is an argument made by many people, is that the states with lower populations are better represented, which isn't fair, especially because the non-white communities are most often in larger states. And so that means that the needs of the minorities are often overlooked because they're in larger states which don't have as good of representation, I guess, as the smaller states or the states with less population. And so the white communities tend to have their needs met and heard while the minority needs get overlooked. And so that is one reason why the Senate is not useful. Another reason why the Senate is not useful to the country is that they have an unnecessary veto power, which makes it extremely difficult to pass legislation, but especially if you are in the party of the president. And so when I was doing some research on this, I learned that presidents have approximately 2 years to try and pass their legislative agenda because that's about as long as they have control of both the Senate and the House. However, even when they have control of both the Senate and the House, the Senate's filibuster, which is like their veto power, makes it extremely difficult to pass any sort of agenda. And then as an American citizen, you elect a president and with the expectation that they'll fulfill the things they promise, but a majority of the veto points are supplied by the Senate, and those prohibit the laws and the different bills from going through and like legislation from being passed. So a lot of the times the president can't do a lot of the things they promised. So the Senate just ends up holding things up, and it just slows down the process and is unnecessary. The last point that I go over in here is the severe imbalance of the separation of powers. And this is because recently the Senate and the House of Representatives have kind of slowly meshed together, I guess is a good way of saying that. And so it's kind of forced the executive branch to step in, and then the division, like the separation of power and those dividing lines are blurred, and it makes it really messy. And as a result, the president usually has had a tendency to step in on issues that he doesn't need to. And when that happens, a president is a lot more likely to take a strong stance on something. The more things he's involved in, the more he's likely to have a strong stance, which then eliminates the chance for a moderate president, which is what I think all American citizens really want is a moderate president. And so if the Senate were abolished, the power could just be handled by one body, by the House of Representatives, and then the separation of powers could be restored, and it would just be a lot more efficient. One counter argument that I made, though, in the paper is that the committees in the Senate are very useful. There are 3 different types, and they each are dedicated to studying different issues in depth. So while we can argue that it takes forever to get legislation passed and nobody can come to an agreement, and it just gets passed around and nothing ever goes through, that can also be beneficial in that some of the things proposed would be very detrimental to the country and to the American people. And so if the process was just easy and things were to get passed, just like that, that would be really dangerous for the country. And so the different committees in the Senate are very useful in kind of breaking down, different bills and laws and stuff and keeping the country safe. I do think, however, though, from the 3 reasons I mentioned earlier, being the disproportionate representation, unnecessary veto power, and the dissolving of the separation of powers, that abolishing the Senate should at least be considered because they aren't very useful to the country as it stands.